The day began like any other. It was Wednesday, September 29, 1982. In the suburbs around Chicago, the air was crisp, leaves were starting to turn, people went to work, children went to school. Life felt safe and predictable. In medicine cabinets across the city, a familiar red and white box sat waiting. It held extra-strength Tylenol capsules. People trusted this brand. They used it for headaches, they used it for fevers, they used it for common aches and pains. It was a staple in many homes. No one had any reason to believe that this trusted product could hold a deadly secret. But something was terribly wrong. A 12-year-old girl named Mary Kellerman woke up with a cold. She had a sore throat and a runny nose. Her parents did what many parents would do. They gave her one extra-strength Tylenol capsule. It was a simple act of care. They believed they were helping her feel better. They had no way of knowing what was about to happen. Mary took the pill, and a normal morning quickly turned into a nightmare. Soon after taking the capsule, Mary collapsed on the bathroom floor. Her parents were in shock. Paramedics arrived and rushed her to the hospital. Doctors did everything they could, but it was too late. Mary Kellerman was pronounced dead. On that very same day, in another Chicago suburb, a man named Adam Janus felt a pain in his chest. He was a 27-year-old postal worker. He went home from work early. To ease his pain, he took an extra-strength Tylenol capsule from a bottle he had just purchased that morning. Within moments, he collapsed and died. His family was devastated. They gathered at his home to mourn their sudden shocking loss. Adam's younger brother, Stanley Janus, was 25 years old. He was suffering from a headache brought on by the stress and grief of his brother's death. He took a Tylenol capsule from the same bottle Adam had used. His 19-year-old wife, Teresa Janus, also took a capsule. Almost immediately, Stanley collapsed. Soon after, Teresa collapsed as well. Paramedics were called back to the same house. The scene was one of chaos and disbelief. Stanley and Teresa were rushed to the hospital, but they could not be saved. 3 people from the same family were dead in a matter of hours. This was no longer just a series of sad coincidences. The first responders and doctors who saw the Janus family were alarmed. They knew something was very, very wrong. 2 sharp-thinking public health nurses, Helen Jensen and Nick Pichos, started connecting the dots. They talked to the grieving family members. They learned that all the victims had taken extra-strength Tylenol just before they collapsed. This vital piece of information was the first major clue. The pattern started to become clearer as more victims appeared. Mary Reiner, a 27-year-old new mother, had just given birth to her 4th child. She was at home recovering when she took Tylenol for her pain. She collapsed and died. In another part of the area, a 31-year-old woman named Mary McFarland was at work. She took a Tylenol for a headache and died shortly after. Then, a 35-year-old flight attendant named Paula Prince was found dead in her apartment. Now, there were 7 victims. They were different ages. They lived in different neighborhoods. They did not know each other. But they all had one thing in common. They had all taken extra-strength Tylenol capsules from different bottles, purchased at different stores. The remaining capsules from the victims' bottles were sent to a laboratory for testing. The lab technicians worked carefully. They opened the capsules and analyzed the white powder inside. The results were shocking and terrifying. The capsules were not filled with acetaminophen, the active ingredient in Tylenol. They were laced with a massive, lethal dose of potassium cyanide. Cyanide is a fast-acting and deadly poison. It works by stopping the body's cells from using oxygen. The discovery of cyanide explained everything. The evidence pointed to something more local and more terrifying. Product tampering. Someone had taken the bottles from store shelves, opened the capsules, replaced the medicine with cyanide, and then carefully put the bottles back in the stores for unsuspecting customers to buy. Now the investigation turned from a medical mystery into a criminal one. The criminal investigation was one of the largest in U.S. history. Thousands of law enforcement officers, local police, the Illinois State Police, and the FBI worked together. Their goal was to find the person, or people, responsible for the murders. They collected and tested thousands of bottles of Tylenol from stores and homes. They were looking for fingerprints, DNA, or any other physical evidence that could lead them to the killer. The scale of the task was immense. The tamperer had been careful, leaving behind very few clues. Investigators mapped out the locations where the poisoned bottles had been purchased. They realized the killer had likely moved between different stores in the Chicago area, randomly placing the deadly bottles on the shelves. They interviewed store clerks and customers. They reviewed store security footage, but video surveillance was not as common or as clear as it is today. The investigation was a slow, painstaking process. Every lead had to be followed, every tip had to be checked. The case generated a flood of tips from the public. At one point, a man sent a letter to Johnson & Johnson demanding $1 million to stop the killing. The man, James Lewis, was tracked down and arrested. While he was convicted of extortion, investigators could never find enough evidence to link him directly to the actual poisonings. Yet, despite decades of work by dedicated investigators, the case remains officially unsolved. The news reached the headquarters of Johnson & Johnson, the parent company of Tylenol's manufacturer, McNeil Consumer Products. The company was facing its worst crisis ever. Tylenol was its most successful product. It held a huge share of the pain reliever market. The chairman, James Burke, had to make a decision. He could try to minimize the damage and protect the brand, or he could take drastic action to protect the public no matter the cost. He chose to put people first. Johnson & Johnson's response became a textbook example of responsible crisis management. The company immediately stopped all advertising for Tylenol. It set up a national hotline to answer questions from a worried public. The company fully cooperated with the police, the FBI, and the Food and Drug Administration. They shared all the information they had about manufacturing and distribution. The most significant action came next. Johnson & Johnson issued a massive nationwide recall. They pulled all Tylenol products from every store shelf in the United States. This was not just limited to the Chicago area. The company recalled about 31 million bottles. The cost of the recall was enormous, estimated to be over $100 million at the time. It was a huge financial hit, but the company understood that public safety was more important than profit. They believed that if they did the right thing, they might one day be able to earn back the public's trust. Trust in everyday products was shattered. The Tylenol poisoning sent a wave of fear across the country. What had happened in Chicago could happen anywhere. People looked at the medicine in their own homes with suspicion. The simple act of taking a pill for a headache was now filled with anxiety. Many people stopped taking all over-the-counter medications, not just Tylenol. The trust that people had in the safety of the things they bought at the store was deeply shaken. The media played a huge role in keeping the public informed. A public health emergency was declared. Using loudspeakers on police cars, officials drove through Chicago neighborhoods telling people to stop using Tylenol immediately. The warning quickly spread across the city, then the state, and then the entire nation. Halloween was just a few weeks away and the fear was especially high. Parents worried that someone might tamper with candy. Many communities canceled trick-or-treating events. The story also led to a number of copycat incidents and false alarms. People reported suspected tampering in other products around the country. Each report had to be investigated, adding to the sense of national unease. The Tylenol crisis had changed the way people thought about safety. It was a harsh lesson that danger could come from the most unexpected places. The world felt a little less safe. Over the years, the case has been revisited many times. New forensic technologies have been used to re-examine the evidence. DNA testing has been performed on the small traces that were collected. No one has ever been charged for the 7 murders. The identity of the Tylenol tamperer is still a mystery. For the families of the victims, this lack of justice is a source of ongoing pain. The person responsible for their loss was never held accountable. The crisis forced a revolution in packaging. The Tylenol crisis had an immediate and lasting impact on packaging. Before 1982, pill bottles had simple screw-off caps. There was no seal to show if the bottle had been opened. This made it easy to tamper without obvious signs. The poisonings exposed this major flaw. The FDA moved quickly to create new regulations. New rules required tamper-evident packaging for over-the-counter drugs. Manufacturers had to use features that made tampering visible. Companies began to add multiple layers of protection. A glued carton was often the first barrier. A tight plastic shrink band around the bottle cap. A strong foil or paper seal glued over the mouth of the bottle. Johnson & Johnson relaunched Tylenol with a safer design. They introduced triple-seal tamper-resistant packaging, glued box, plastic band around the cap, foil seal over the bottle opening. They promoted a new solid pill form called the caplet. Caplets are smooth, caplets are coated, caplets are shaped like capsules but are solid tablets. Much harder to tamper with than 2-part gelatin capsules. The company wanted to show the public they had learned and were committed to safety. These changes were not limited to Tylenol. The pharmaceutical industry adopted similar measures. The food industry adopted similar measures. Today we take these features for granted. A seal on our milk carton, a plastic wrap on our jar of peanut butter, a foil barrier on our medicine bottles. We instinctively check these seals before use. This everyday habit stems from 1982. The tragedy forced an evolution in packaging, a shield of safety between product and consumer. The changes went beyond just packaging. The Tylenol crisis also led to a significant change in the law. Before 1982, there was no specific federal law that made product tampering a crime. While someone could be charged with assault or murder, the act of tampering itself was not clearly defined in the legal code. Lawmakers realized that this was a dangerous gap in the system. They knew they needed a strong legal deterrent to prevent similar attacks from happening in the future. In 1983, just 1 year after the poisonings, the United States Congress passed what became known as the Tylenol Bill. This bill made it a federal crime to tamper with consumer products. The law created harsh penalties, long prison sentences and large fines. It gave federal agencies like the FBI clear authority to investigate these cases, especially when they crossed state lines. This new law was a powerful tool for law enforcement. The law was designed to do two main things. First, it aimed to punish those who commit such crimes. Second, and perhaps more importantly, it was meant to deter others from even thinking about it. The law made it clear that product tampering was not a prank or a minor offense. It was a serious felony with severe consequences. This was especially important in the wake of the copycat incidents that followed the Chicago poisonings. The new law helped to give authorities the power they needed to respond quickly and forcefully to any threat of tampering. This legal change marked the beginning of a new era of consumer protection. The government took on a more active role in ensuring the safety of the products on the market. The combination of new packaging regulations and a new federal anti-tampering law created a much safer environment for consumers. It showed that when government and industry work together in response to a crisis, they can create meaningful and lasting change. The safety measures we rely on today are a direct result of this partnership, forged in the aftermath of a terrible tragedy. We have been trained as a society to look, check, and report. We inspect packaging for signs of damage or tampering before we buy. We teach our children to be cautious. This heightened awareness is perhaps the most important legacy. It has turned consumers into active participants in their own safety. It has made product tampering much harder to carry out successfully. The enduring legacy build a safer world for all.